is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This is episode number 645. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources, and joining me on the line, all the way from Denver, Colorado, back in business, it's Luis Scott-Vargas. Luis, welcome home.
Hey, what's going on, Marshall?
Are you all adjusted back from your trip?
Yeah. Me and the rest of the Good Luck Games squad went to the Bahamas for a week for a work trip, and it was fun, but also tiring. So got to meet the rest of our remote team and got to, got a lot of cool, productive meetings and hangouts done. But yeah, I'm not unhappy to be home.
Did you do anything? To fire
up the call, of course.
Yeah, come on. You've been looking forward to this for like a week and a half. Did you get to do anything fun? Like, did you touristy stuff or any good food or anything?
There was a water park, like an actual water park, with slides and everything, kind of attached to the resort we were staying at. And I got to hang out with my brother in the wave pool, and that was pretty sweet.
Oh, that's sweet. That sounds really good. Well, I'm glad you're back. You came back just in time to do the sunset show for Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, and that's what we're going to do today. We're going to go over all your favorite categories, and we're going to give you our broad strokes thoughts on the set as a whole as well. How did they do? Did they hit the mark on this one, or did they miss? And we're even going to give it a grade at the end, and that's all coming up in this episode of the show. Before we get into it, let's talk about our sponsor, channelfireball.com. Make sure you check them out for all things magical that you may need. If you're looking for singles, particularly if, maybe the OP changes have you going, I need a Pioneer deck or whatever, head on over to Channel Fireball. They've got a marketplace now where when you search for singles, it'll show you results from all the stores that are part of the marketplace, which gives you a really big selection, both in terms of, just broad strokes cards, like just being able to find the cards you need at all. But beyond that, even things like shipping speed and the condition of the cards, price, all that kind of stuff, you can kind of sort by that so you can make sure to get the best deal every time. If you do pick up something over Channel Fireball, if you use the affiliate code LR at checkout, you just have to type in the two letters into that box during the checkout. Then it lets them know that we're the ones that sent you over, and it helps out the show, and we do appreciate it. Show is also brought to you by FTX. That's a place to buy, sell, manage all of your digital assets. That might sound weird to you, but we are heading in a direction where digital assets are going to become more and more important potentially. If you want to get ahead of the curve, FTX is a great place to go check it out. If you're within the United States, it's ftx.us. Outside, it's ftx.com. You can go there to poke around, check it out, and then when you're ready to kind of dive in, that's the place to go. It's safe, it's regulated, and it's the trustworthy source for your digital asset management needs. If you do decide to check out FTX or anything similar to that, make sure that you consult an investment professional first, as there is risk involved with any type of investment, and you need to really understand that before you dive in. But when you're ready, they'll be there for you. The show's also brought to you by you via the Patreon, and it's patreon.com/limited resources. If you want to get a LR sticker for your laptop or your water bottle or your car or whatever, and a thank you note from us, you get one if you sign up at any level on the Patreon, and we really appreciate everybody who supports us over there. Luis, let's get right into the sunset show. We'll start with a crack-a-pack. This will be our last one. While I'm getting that up too, I did want to mention that I am going to go to the Streets of New Capenna pre-release that our friends from Loading Ready Run do for every set up until the pandemic. But of course they had to cool off on those because it involves travel and bringing in guests and stuff. But things have opened up enough so that they're going to do one for Streets of New Capenna, and they invited both me and Kenji Numatanami Egashira up, and we're going to be heading up there tomorrow, and we're going to get a first chance to look at New Capenna and play with it and stuff. So if you want to check that out, I'll put a link in the show notes to Loading Ready Run's Twitch, and it'll be on Saturday, and it'll be live on there, and you'll get a chance to see the cards for the first time that I do. Here is our crack-a-pack, our last one for Kamigawa. We've got Aki Ronin. No. Brute Suit. You said that you see a little bit of play with the mono red deck that came up, but generally speaking, this card didn't really play a role.
Yeah, I liked it in some of the ninja decks too, when you had like network disruptors and other Moonfolk puzzle makers, which is all these 1-power creatures, but you don't really have to take Brute Suits early.
Right. Dramatist Puppet, that card really kind of missed. Nobody plays it. This is a card that I'm really surprised missed as hard as it missed. It's Mnemonic Sphere. Man, sure, 1 and a blue to get it down, then 1 and a blue to sack it to draw 2 cards is a little bit expensive, but even then you're kind of making up for it by the installment plan. But it has channel for blue where you just get to pitch it and draw cards. So your downside's extremely low and the upside's like reasonable. And I can't remember the last time I cast a Mnemonic Sphere.
Yeah, it didn't really fit into most decks. So as cool of a card as it is, it didn't really get there as much as I expected it to either.
Yeah, it just didn't fit. That was it. Aki Warpaint really didn't fit. Imperial Subduer. Card could be a little scary in that deck. This, I think, was supposed to be one of the better commons for the Samurai Warriors deck, but that deck missed so hard that the Imperial Subduer ends up missing as well. Here's a good one, though. Network Disruptor. You and I were all over this one from the beginning, and it definitely performed its role in the format.
Oh, yeah, I would be happy taking this card early.
Yeah, it's really, really good in Ninjas, and you can play it in a few other decks as well. Fade into Antiquity. We anticipated playing at least one of these in the main deck from all the way going back to the set review, and that did end up being true. This was a card you could play 1 and even 2 of in the main if you wanted.
Yeah, it ended up being pretty good. There was just enough targets. And it turned out the line was enchantments. Cards that killed just artifacts tended not to be main deckable, but cards that killed both tended to be pretty good.
Chain Flail Centipede. This is a good sort of bellwether for the reconfigure mechanic. If a card like this ended up being good, then we would know that reconfigure was just a really good mechanic and a card, that you could play most of your reconfigure cards across the board. As it turns out, Chain Flail Centipede was not. It did not meet that bar. It was a little bit below it. It wasn't unplayable by any stretch, but it was not the type of thing where you just have to take it and play it. And so that gave us a good kind of, okay, this one's a little below. Where do we need reconfigure to be to make it really good? Because it is inherently a very powerful mechanic. This one gave us a good idea for what was a little bit below the bar as far as playability goes. Uncommons. This is a nice one. Michiko's Reign of Truth. This is the saga that rewards you for having enchantments and or artifacts on the battlefield. This card ended up being really powerful, particularly in black-white, you could make it go, but even in green-white too, it went off. Like Michiko's Reign of Truth is the real deal.
Yeah, definitely ended up being pretty good. I do think that Network Disruptor is still just a better first pick. Okay. I think that it adds a lot more to your deck when it's good than Michiko's Reign of Truth. And almost every blue deck ended up wanting Network Disruptor, whereas not every white deck wanted the Reign of Truth.
That's true. Yeah, it is a primarily aggressive card. The first 2 chapters happen on your turn and are a temporary bump, so you really do need to kind of take advantage. Next is Historian's Wisdom. This is the one that you said you played it a little bit here and there, weren't blown away, but you said you thought it was playable.
If you have enough creatures in your deck, especially ones of decent size, yeah, it's fine, but not really a card I'm itching to get into my deck.
Right. Next one is a card I liked a lot early, cooled down a bit based on color stuff, but still really like it. It's Enthusiastic Mechanaut. That's the blue-red 2/2 flyer that makes your artifacts 1 less to cast. Very powerful card. It is an artifact itself, goes perfectly into the Grixis, themed artifact deck, but I'm a little cooler on that deck than I was at the beginning of the format, so the Mechanaut took a little hit there too.
Yeah, for sure. I did love that deck. It's one of my favorite decks just in general, but not to the point where I think you should be slamming Mechanauts first.
Right, and the gold nature of it, etc. Next card was actually our preview card, and it is a really excellent card, but it was hurt by the fact that red.
I'm excited to learn what this card is.
Yeah, that red was one of the was the worst color by a lot. It's Twin Shot Sniper. I mean, what an amazing card, right? Like this is the card that would be on the short list of cards that you would peg to be a Mythic Uncommon potentially. We thought that when we saw it, but the fact that red was so bad really did hurt this. It is not in the conversation for Mythic Uncommon.
No, though it is the card I would take out of this pack so far.
Agreed.
It's just too good not to.
Yeah, I think it's fantastic. And our rare, kind of an interesting one, it's Thousand Face Shadow, which is also what we opened last week, by the way. That's the blue 1/1 flyer with ninjutsu for 2 blue. And it does this weird thing. It tries to just say when you ninjutsu this, but I guess that isn't shorthand that they were comfortable doing. So it kind of describes all the conditions of ninjutsuing something where it enters the battlefield from your hand if it's attacking. It's like, okay, how could that there are other ways, but it's pretty uncommon. But basically, if you ninjutsu it, then you get to make a copy token of another attacking creature. It actually ends up coming up fairly infrequently, but I really like that we have Network Disruptor and Thousand Face Shadow in this pack because they serve very similar role.
Yeah, I think I would just take Network Disruptor over the Thousand Face Shadow. Mm-hmm. But it's pretty
close. Which is a little sad.
Yes, I have played a decent amount with Thousand Face Shadow, and it is good in the ninja deck. Like, you do end up wanting it. The Network Disruptor being good in like an artifact deck as well gives it a little bit of extra utility, but either way, I'm just going to take the Twin Shot Sniper here. Like, yeah, just a great card.
Yeah, that's what I would take as well. Yes, color preference matters, and if given a tiebreaker scenario or even just a card that's slightly worse but in a much better color, you might take it. But that card really is the best card out of that set. Okay, let's get into the Sunset Show here. If you could summarize Kamigawa Neon Dynasty in one sentence, what would it be?
Lots of colors, lots of complexity. It had a lot going on. Alternately, it's just pick the saga because the sagas were the best thing. Pretty much like that card type was like universally great. Yeah. But this set actually isn't that easily summed up in one sentence, like more than most. It's just, it's a complex set. It's got a lot of different themes going on.
It had a lot going on. For me to summarize it, I would say 2-for-1's rule of the day, right? Sure. Like this was the set where if you didn't get a 2-for-1, you kind of needed an excuse, right? Like it better be really good, either raw power wise or flexibility wise. You needed to be able to churn out card advantage and really grind. I felt really strongly that the sagas set the tone for the set. The fact that they changed the design of them to transform into a on the battlefield creature at the end for chapter 3 rather than giving you some other benefit was a huge design choice change that altered the sagas into, your baseline for them was 2-for-1, right? That was kind of like where you started. And sometimes some of them were even crept up into the 3-for-1 category, either conditionally or just all the time. And that's really powerful stuff when they don't really ask anything else of you. The only downside to them is that they're a little slow, right? So if there was a particularly fast deck in the format and you're like Saga on turn 2, Saga on turn 3, you could get stomped. But as things turned out, the potentially fastest deck, which should have been white-red, ended up not being, it's actually just one of the worst color pairs. So you almost never ran into a scenario where you were just going to straight up run out of time on your sagas. And if that's the case, you need to be able to beat other people's sagas. So you either need your own or you need card advantage that can keep up with them. And that is, like, when I think back on this set, that's what I'm going to think of.
And even if you are off to a slow start, some of the sagas like Okiba Reckoner Raid gains you 2 life. The life of Toshiro Umezawa kills one of their creatures, maybe 2. And so you end up in a spot where your sagas, just because they're not a creature yet, aren't even necessarily setting you that far behind.
Right. And that's very powerful stuff if you're not being pressured. Right. So, yeah. And I'll be honest with you, though. I love that. Like, I love formats like that. I love letting the game kind of unfold a little bit and not having it be the first person to spend 9 mana or something, right? It's like 2-drop, 3-drop, 4-drop. Okay, well, you win. Like, I like that these games felt like you could come back. There was a number of turns in the mid game where there was a real tension where somebody might have been a little bit further ahead on board, but you have some sagas coming off of suspend, as the shorthand that we might call it, and that's going to change the way the battlefield works because the turn, if you're behind on board, turn 5 comes, one of your sagas turns into a creature, and then you spend 5 mana. Well, that board looks way different than it did when you passed a turn back before, and all of a sudden you're back in the game. Though that leads to a lot of really exciting comebacks or a lot of exciting tension over the course of the game. And I felt the gameplay in this set was really top tier. I mean, one of the best that we've seen. And that was part of the reason why. What would you say the best archetypes were now that we've kind of had the whole thing behind us?
Well, blue-black ninjas, I think was great.
Yeah.
I think that green-white enchantments was very strong.
Yep,
and
I like that one.
Various kind of multicolor piles definitely had their moments. And I also think that the artifact decks didn't end up quite making it, though the good versions were good. And one of the things that's cool about this set is that the good versions of most decks ended up being pretty good.
That's right. And even you could even dig down deep. The only one that I really can't come up with a good version of, that I remember that I ever played was green red.
Yeah.
And it is interesting too, because, the other, I agree with you. Blue, black ninjas, green, white enchantments were two of the best performers, but the other one was really multicolor decks, right? Just like we'll say green based that stretched out for 3, 4, and even sometimes 5 colors, depending on what level of fixing you got and how greedy you wanted to be. But it's also worth noting that these decks were not just greedy. They were actually good too if you built them correctly.
Yeah, I mean, we'll talk about it more in the course of the show, but we joked about the Kami War when we saw it, like, wouldn't it be funny if you got this off? And then, turns out it's actually just, a pretty good card.
It is. It's actually just a solid performer in the format. And I remember that really early because I think I said something along the lines of, look, if we're casting the Kami War, I'm thrilled. That's where I want to be in a format anyway. And if you do, let me know, and then, the day after the set came out on Arena, I probably had 10 people saying, I did it, I got it, I cast it. And I'm like, oh boy. Oh yeah. These are when we didn't really know the format.
One of my first 5 drafts or something.
Yeah. So that's awesome. And by the way, another indicator of this is where I want the format to be. So there you go. But it does muddy the waters when it comes to the archetypes, because if I told you, oh, blue green was a really good archetype. Well, it was very rare that I was just blue and green.
Right.
Right. And then if I told you green red was good, it would be but you never just play green and red,
So what kind of informs this a little bit too is the control decks tend to be able to go this direction a lot easier than the aggro decks, because aggro decks can't futz around with 3 colors and tap lands and all those things. So then what you ended up with was the control decks were a lot of colors. The aggro decks were very few colors, except red was just added. Probably one of the weaker iterations of red that we've seen. So what you end up with is the multicolored decks taking up more of the space, because a lot of the aggro decks, I think, we're a few steps behind.
Yeah. And, it's also, one really interesting thing about the way that these two ideas lock together that we were just talking about is red itself was actually fine in this format. The cards Kami's Flare, that's a powerful common, right? That's, 3 damage for 2 mana instant speed to kill something. That's on the higher end of what you get from a burn spell. Voltage Surge, same thing. Kill something early, but if you sack an artifact, you can do 4 damage for 1 mana at instant speed.
This deck or this set has a decent amount of artifacts that you don't mind necessarily sacrificing.
Exactly. Now, some of the common red creatures fell a little bit short, but what I see here isn't that red particularly was weak, although it was on the weaker side. What I see is that if you bring Kami's Flare to a fight against a Saga, you are not going to win that fight. These 1-for-1 spot removal spells, they need to be used to remove a blocker and then apply damage to the opponent's face and kill them before the Sagas can do those things. And so what I see is there wasn't enough cheap, aggressive red creatures to back up that plan. And that ultimately was the demise. And then also I think the red-white deck flopping too. What cards were we most wrong about during the set review, or just surprised us one way or the other? I mean, I know one card, probably the card I'm going to think about the most from this set leaving, which is Imperial Oath. I'm still surprised at how well that card performs.
What's funny is this is one of those spots where we're like, well, we didn't come in super low on it or anything, but given where it landed, we definitely got it wrong.
Right.
we were like, well, we can see why this is powerful. It does cost 6 mana, etc. It turns out Imperial Oath just the hands down best common and really just did tons of work. In fact, it was crazy when we had Sutcliffe on, and it's like, yeah, Imperial Oaths actually get better the more you have. Having 5 is better than having 4, and it's like, really?
Really? And the only reason we don't know that 6 is the best number is because not enough people did it. But yeah, that to me is an absolute outlier. When we talked about that with Sutcliffe, I went back, through the last like year and a half, 2 years of sets and picked out where 6 mana commons ranked like the highest that they got. And I mean, they're not even in the top 10 ever. And this one was between number 1 and number 2 for the duration of the set. It was this or a 1-drop, Akiba Reckoner Raid that we're jockeying back and forth for position. And to me, that is incredible. That will always stand out to me as just an incredible outlier. Other cards Bamboo Grove Archer. That's my boy now. I mean, and again, I think we left room for it to do a job in the set review, but boy, it does that job way better than I think we anticipated.
Yeah, I like the card, to be honest. I just remember us having one of our more lengthy discussions about the utility. It ends up being a really strong card in the right circumstances, and it just does a lot of what these green decks want to do. The Long Reach of Night is another one we both definitely were too low on.
Yeah, I love that card now.
That card ended up being quite strong.
Yeah, definitely. Now that we know what it does. What were the most underrated cards in the set?
Well, Imperial Oath definitely was underrated for the large majority of the set, given how good it ended up being, right?
Perhaps even now?
Yeah, it's possible.
Yeah.
And then Suit Up is an interesting one. This is the 2 and a blue. Makes one of your creatures or artifacts into a 4/5 creature. Excuse me.
Oh no! Is it going to come back? Or
the phantom sneeze? Yeah. And you draw a card. But a 3-mana combat trick that made it one of your small creatures into a big creature, and you drew a card, ended up being exceedingly good, especially since the blue decks had ninjutsu and got a lot of prompting to block there, right? Where you're like, oh, I guess I'm supposed to block here.
That's right. It really did just feel like you were kind of forced to trade off a lot against that deck. And then you could get punished pretty hard. I mean, you lose your creature and they get a card. One shortcut you could use for that is what if it was just a removal spell, right? Like 2 and a blue, kill a creature, draw a card. Like we'd play that, as many of those as we could get. Now, this isn't quite that, but it played out that way often enough. Another card on the opposite end of that spectrum is Tamio's Safekeeping. Man, that card just kept going up and up the chain. I still don't play it that much. I just feel like in the big ramp decks, like that's not really where I wanted to be. But I mean, it was the top ranked green common. It was higher than Master's Rebuke, higher than Fang. So there you go. What were the most controversial cards? There was only one that came to mind for me straight away. I mean, I'm sure there's plenty. I mean, honestly, we could talk about Imperial Oath and stuff in that context, but the card that jumped to mind for me was the alternate art Swamp.
Crazy. Yeah.
It has red tones to it. And we actually talked about this with TBS last week a little bit too, but this is a cultural reference to modern day Japan, that red lantern. But at first glance, just looking at the card, it just, for whatever reason, makes you think it's a mountain.
Well, the part that's brutal about it is this card is just going to continue to get played after the set rotates out because it's really cool art. It's cool
such a great looking card.
But my experience playing against the card is just negative. I just don't like seeing something that looks like a mountain that's actually a swamp.
Yeah.
It always confuses me. It just does.
It does to me too. And it's really sad because it's such cool artwork. And the design of these cards, that whole cycle of them is so punchy, right? Like you just can't not notice those when they hit the battlefield. They're so cool. But man, I get confused every time I see that one. So, that was somehow a basic land take's most controversial card this time. What was your favorite artwork in this set?
Geothermal Kami, the hot tub Kami.
Oh yeah.
I was mega into it, and
Oh yeah.
I don't know. I just loved the idea, the concept, the art. It was all perfect for me.
Yeah, that's a great one. Who did the art for that?
It was Rudy Siswanto.
Yeah, that's great. My favorite art was I get a 2-for-1 here. It's Boseiju Reaches Skyward, which is a saga. So there's actually two artworks on it when you flip it over. But man, this is one that I think people mistake. And by the way, it's by Jeju Chen. I think that people thought that it was supposed to be like pixel art when they first saw it, like kind of computery pixelated 8-bit kind of thing, but it's not. I talked about it on my stream because I was thinking that it might be like a quilt type of art, like where there's patches of a material kind of put together. And it actually wasn't quite that either. It's a form of woodblock artwork, apparently, where you paint or color wood blocks and then piece them together kind of like mosaic style. And so when you get far away from it, you can see that it's a tree, and on the front side, it's a tree it looks like it's kind of rocketing upwards or something like that. But yeah, so that's an actual type of artwork that exists, and this is a translation of that. So really cool. Great job on that artwork. I love it. What were the best build-around cards in the set? Kind of interesting. I feel like a lot of the build-around space got eaten up by the sagas. So there aren't quite as many as you would normally see. But the one that came to mind the most for me was Brilliant Restoration, which is the 7-mana white card that lets you get back all your artifacts and enchantments from the yard and put them on the battlefield.
Oh yeah, that one was fantastic. We definitely came in a little low on that one.
Yeah, I don't know. I played it a bunch of times, and I think we were pretty close. It was good, and it did some things, but like I cast it and lost. In a deck where I built around. It wasn't just like it doesn't kill their stuff, right? So like,
right.
You have to be kind of trading or getting value from the cards, but it was definitely powerful. And I think one of the better build arounds. What other build arounds were there?
The Combi War.
Yeah.
Was definitely one. The 5 colors. Yep. Once you get there, Containment Construct, I really liked. That one was actually a lot of fun. That was the 2-1 that when you discard a card, you can cast it until end of turn.
Yeah.
So it worked with Channel, and it worked with like a lot of the other just random discard effects and stuff like that. So I found that one to be a really sweet design. Yeah,
I really like that one too. There was the Dragon Spark Reactor Oni Cult Anvil, decks as well. Again, we tried these out pretty hard early. I got some success with it, but realized that they were a little more fragile and a little more payoff dependent than I think I was just running hot early or something and getting all the payoffs. But, Oni Cult Anvil was legitimately really powerful, worth splashing, could win the game. Dragon Spark Reactor, less so. It could do some things, but you had to be all in on it. And if you drew it late, it was a lot worse than the Anvil. But still, those cards those saw play. Like you could build around those and do things. So that was kind of cool. What about the shrines? There's the individual shrine, fine. And then there was the artifact creature that digs up a shrine. But come on, when you read a shrine, you're like, I want to get all of them, right? I want to get 3 of them going at once. Was that a thing?
I think that the shrines ended up not being the best build around or anything like that. Like they just ended up being fine, basically. Like most of the shrines that you ended up putting in your deck are shrines that you're like, I'm happy to put this card in my deck because it's good enough already.
Yeah.
And then once I have that, maybe I free roll another shrine in there as well.
That's exactly how it played out. Yeah. And it turns out that even if you could cast multiple colors of shrines, you just had a better spells to go get than the shrines, right? To cast them. I don't think I mean, the most shrines I saw on a battlefield for the whole format was 2.
I never saw 3 shrines in play.
I didn't either.
I would imagine any game where there's 3 shrines in play is not going to last very long, though.
Right, or they either break it up, like they kill one of them, or you die.
Right. The board position of I have 3 shrines and the game continues with 3 shrines in play.
That has a very short shelf life. Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be like 2 turns. Otherwise, you just concede. They're making 3 tokens, getting +3/+3, and dealing a bunch of damage every turn, or something along those lines.
Right. But it's cool because the shrines, they're not a flop. Like they were still enchantments. They were enchantment creatures, which were beneficial, and even on their own, a bunch of them were totally playable. So that was pretty cool. What card still looks good when you read it, but it just doesn't see play?
The Imperial Recovery Unit was one of the that kind of struck this note for me.
This is such a good example for this one.
Yeah, the 3/4 vehicle that like when it attacks, you get to raise dead a 2-cost creature or vehicle, and it's just like, yeah, this isn't really going to get there. It never really did.
It never really did, but I just read it right now, and I'm like, hey, looks good, right? Crew 2, I can do that. Like most of the creatures in my deck do that, but yeah, it didn't hold up. What else?
Ancestral Katana was one that I thought at first was going to be pretty good.
Yeah,
like it was a pretty cheap equipment. It gave you a pretty good amount of value when you equip it, and it just turns out that those decks weren't that good. And the best cards in their white decks were typically not small samurai attacking alone.
Right, and I think it's just another casualty of that red-white deck flopping. Another one just at common was Heir of the Ancient Fang. That's the 2 and a green 2/3, but when it ETBs, you get a +1/+1 counter on it if you control a modified creature. And, looked at that and I thought, okay, 2 mana 2/3, not great, but a 3 mana 3/4 is pretty good if you can curve into it. But it turns out there was a couple of things working against it. It was actually pretty hard to get a modified creature, well, kind of at all, but definitely on turn 2. Again, the red-green deck flopping, and that was supposed to be the modified deck. And then on top of it, this just isn't what green was about, right?
No.
You would much rather be ramping on turn 3 or doing a saga or something like that, and not casting just something that ultimately is just power and toughness. So even though I read it and go, okay, reasonable baseline for a common with a little bit of upside, it's like not even close. Like the card was just unplayable. So
yeah.
Was this a Prince or a Pauper set?
I think it was a Pauper set. The auras or the sagas have a lot of pauperness to them for sure.
Mm-hmm. They kind of drag down, like when you're getting a lot of 2-for-1s at common and uncommon, when somebody peeks out with something really big, you can withstand it a little bit better. Also, I think we should mention the cycle of mythic dragons, right? I mean, if I told you, hey man, mythic dragons, whole cycle, 1 for each color, they got a lot of text on them, you're thinking like, all right, well, there's your best cards in the set, kind of as a gimme. And they were good, but they played much closer to like what you would think of for like a rare, like a regular rare, rather than like a mythic bomb that just completely dominates the game.
I totally agree, it's funny. Like I would not have guessed that the mythic dragons were not going to be just windmill slam, best card in the sets. Like they were good, but they did not dominate nearly as much as I kind of expected them to.
Yeah. And I think that's I think that when you have a whole cycle of potential game ending mythic cards like that, and they end up being well balanced and fun and interesting rather than, crushingly dominant, that leads to a more Pauper format as well. Just because that's a big chunk of cards that would otherwise just be, you're done. And I have to give kudos. I mean, I don't know what kind of tight wire act they have to walk with those type of dragons. Cause like if you're a commander player, you like, yeah, these are kind of boring and you've got better options and you don't, they don't really get you to buy packs or whatever. But I'll tell you, as a limited player, those dragons hit a really nice spot and I'm grateful for it for sure.
I think a big part of that too is not really like how good are the dragons versus how bad are the dragons. There's a lot of good exiling answers that ended up putting these dragons in what seemed like a very, very reasonable spot.
Yeah, that's a good point. The format was able to adjust to them as well. What's it's a bad card, but I love it anyway award for you?
It's Invigorating Hot Spring, but specifically Invigorating Hot Spring because of the art that someone posted on Twitter with you as the monkey, where it's like, I'm in my lane, thriving, invigorated.
Oh man, I did see that. That was really funny. Yeah, it's also not a bad choice for this. It's actually a good card, but it's just like, whenever I see it, I'm like, hey, I'm interested in it, in a little hot spring action, but it's like, what deck am I going to put it in? I have to splash for it. And then right away, I'm already like just trying to take something that I don't have to splash for. What's the I literally never win with it, but it always seems to beat me card?
Dude, for me, it's totally Shattered States era.
Oh God, yes.
The threaten. It just like every time it's like they play this, it's amazing, and I'm just like, okay, and then it just like not good.
Yeah, well, it's like when they've cast it against me, it's just the Akroan War, right? It's just like
exactly.
It just literally ends the game every time. The one for me. Oh my God, I got burned by this so many times considering how bad the card is stupid Spell Pierce. I got Spell Pierced a lot and I never played it myself. And it is so frustrating to lose to it, especially.
Well, the thing about losing to Spell Pierce is like, when it's good, it's just devastating. You got your Behold the Unspeakable Spell Pierced on turn 5 or whatever. Or like,
so nasty.
I played this combat trick and they Spell Pierced it. But you also know that if you ever put Spell Pierce in your deck, you would just draw it on turn 7 when your opponent has 8 lands in play.
Yep.
And you would just be like, wow,
just rip it in half. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Awful.
And it is funny because, of course, the type of cards that we pick for this lend themselves to win cast. They are good, but the hidden cost of having them be bad, like Shattered States era, if you're behind, you may not even cast it, or you might just try to get a creature in a few turns, but it doesn't have a big impact on the game. All right. What was my opponent played this, so now I must win or quit Magic forever card. For me, it was Bronze Cudgels, which was this like absurd equipment that only cost 1 to cast and 1 to equip, but you had to dump a whole bunch of mana in it to get it to like pump up the creature. And I'm like, yeah, this is one of the most inefficient, worst equipment we've seen. And if my opponent played it on turn 1, I'm like, all right, sit up in your chair. It's business time. We got to win.
Yeah. I mean, it definitely had that effect. I never played against the card myself, but I did have someone cast Discover the Impossible to like look at the top 5. You can play a 2-cost sorcery for free or instant or sorcery, and they didn't play any spell off it. So I'm just like, man, am I really gonna like, is this really gonna be it? Is this gonna get me? But luckily that was it. I was able to defeat it.
Dared down forced retirement, but were able to get by it.
Yeah, no, it's
incredible.
It's
incredible. And I never lost to Bronze Cudgels either, so we both still get to play.
We both get to continue playing. All right.
Yeah. All right. What was the biggest groan test, the overrun of the set, if you will? So not close, but
no, you nailed it in one. I didn't even bother. Spinning Wheel Kick. It's just like your opponent taps 6 mana or 8 mana, and you're just like, boom. All your creatures will go away. And
it's one of the only cards that can do a one-sided thing like that. It's a, fairly high variance card, right? When it doesn't work out, usually they get 2 for 1 and it costs them their entire turn as well. So it does have a downside in that, but the upside is very much there. This is the type of card that can bring you back from a game that you were really far behind, particularly if you have Fang of Shigeki or something like that, where you can, basically just say, kill that, and kill that, and tap out for it. But it is devastating how big the game can turn on that. Like, it makes me want to actually just, play a bunch of Spell Pierces. What was the most frustrating bad card to lose to? The card, just a card you don't miss playing against, or that just annoyed you?
For me, Futurist Operative, the 3/4 that when it attacked, it was unblockable citizen. You can pay mana to untap it. Because what happened to me, my experience with this card was my opponent plays this and then spends a lot of mana doing 3 damage to me, a turn to me, which normally is not a very good strategy. But there are times when that actually will work out quite well for you. And it felt like in some of those times I was on the receiving end of, a kind of bad beat. So
there you go. Yeah, a card that came to mind for me, I don't know. Is it a bad card? Probably. Thundersteel Colossus, 7 mana, 7/7 trample, haste with crew 2. It just didn't quite do enough to warrant inclusion in really any decks, even the ramp decks. But when that card hit the battlefield, it is a house. Like, it comes out of nowhere. You're getting slammed on, and it is brutal. It isn't that it's not worth the 7 mana. It just didn't have like a great fit. But that, I was like, okay, I'm fine. I'm good. I've got a blocker, maybe even have a Fang out or something, or, my 3/3 reach guy or whatever. And then they're like Thundersteel Colossus attack you. And it's like, wow, okay. I did not anticipate that. That's not a card I didn't play around, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Boy, this is the craziest. I don't remember the last time. I don't know if we have ever read our next award and been like, I don't know. I have no idea. It's what was the bombiest bomb, the card you hope to open up in your sealed pool or to open up pack one, pick one in a draft. I mean, normally I have 3 or 4 cards that jump to mind straight away. And I'm like, it's probably this one, but maybe this one. And I'm just like, I don't know. Like I'm thinking of some saga that gets me, a 2-for-1 or something like that. And it turns out we looked on 17 lands. You had this inclination, Louisa, you were on top of this one, but I was not. Jugan Defends the Temple. That's your bombiest bomb of the set.
Yeah, and it's not far in front of Fable of the Mirror Breaker and then the Wandering Emperor. But the reason I had Jugan and Fable on my radar is that a 3-mana card with this effect on the game, you'll always get to cast it. Part of the reason that the blue Mythic Dragon, right, for 6 mana, yes, when you cast the card, it's fantastic. 6 mana, though, it opens up the door to counterspells, to discard, to you not hitting land number 6, or to the game being too fast for it to have the effect you need.
Uh-huh.
A 3-mana card just doesn't have any of those issues.
Yeah.
If you just draw one of these 3-mana cards in your opening hand, they're both single color, 2 in a red or 2 in a green. You just cast it on turn 3, and then you just win the game because they provide outsized effects, compared to what they cost. So these definitely were. I mean, you can just look at all the formats that Fable's getting played in. Fable and Mirror Breaker showing up in Historic, showing up in Modern,
incredible.
Just a really strong card.
I'm going with Wandering Emperor. I don't care. You can take your little easy to cast 3-mana spells. Give me the bomb Planeswalker here. That's what I want to see opened up. All right, what was the best common for each color?
So for white, very clearly Imperial Oath.
Yep.
For blue, Moon Circuit Hacker kind of beats out Network Disruptor in the modern age as the top 3 being really good.
Mm-hmm.
Black, Okiba Reckoner Raid, again, not actually that close. Red doesn't have a best common. And then
Red's getting the not applicable? Oh my God.
No joke. If you look at commons by win rate, you have to scroll a long time before you get to red.
It's true. It is true. All right.
Green,
sorry, Red.
Cameo Safekeeping ended up being the surprise breakout of the set in terms of best common. Just 1 mana to stop a removal spell and just, effectively answer the opponent's stuff is very, very good.
And I have to say that we're seeing a trend here, right? What's the bombiest bomb? Well, we named 3 cards, all kind of close, no clear spike winner that's just like, that's the one. When it came to the commons, yeah, a couple of the colors had a clear winner, but you mentioned for blue, and I think you can make the argument for green and to a lesser extent black, that there's 2 or 3 cards at the top that are kind of vying for that position. The next one's huge. What is the mythic uncommon for the set? And I'll tell you, a few cards came to mind. I got a few here that I really like, and I'm going to pick one, but there isn't just the home run. That is the card. No question about it. That's the one you want for this set. All of these things are flat. The mythic rares are flat. The bombs are flat. The commons are relatively flat. And for mythic uncommon, I've got Blossom Prancer, Elmer in his final form, Kappa Tech Wrecker, Life of Toshiro Umezawa, and I had to put Behold the Unspeakable on here because it would be unspeakable not to.
And the thing is, all these cards are fantastic. When you start a draft with one of these, you already feel like, from the start, things are going well.
Yeah.
But there are plenty of other cards at Uncommon that give you similar feelings to this.
That's right. And so really interesting. So I'm going to go I'm going to say that Kappa Tech Wrecker is going to be my Mythic Uncommon for the set. I felt that card matched up so incredibly well with the format that it could give you a 2-for-1. It was great at any point, and if you could sneak it in, you were almost always had a target as well. And then it also worked with the fight spells and all that stuff, just a good blocker on its own. So I'm going to say Kappa Tech Wrecker as my number 1. What do you want to give it to?
I think I'll do Blossom Prancer. It felt like for Blossom Prancer, it didn't matter what was going on. When you cast it, it was good. Behold is also very similar. Whereas like Life of Toshiro is probably the best of these when you have the opening of turn 2, play this, kill your creature.
Totally.
But the games where they didn't have a creature for you to kill, yeah, those were not too crazy.
Yeah, I was playing on the stream earlier this week, and I played out a 2-1 on turn 2, and my opponent, Life of Toshiro Mizawa, and I was like, oh my God, this feels like week 1. You know, just like, this isn't supposed to keep happening. It felt real bad. Okay, this one's a little easier. What's the worst card in the set? The biggest blank, the last pick.
Easy, Mirror Box. This is the one that makes it so your legends aren't legendary. For this to come up in limited, strange things have had to happen.
Yeah, you would have to go very, very deep to, I mean, you still wouldn't play it, but even then, just to have it do anything to the game at all. Once a card says the legend rule doesn't apply, you know, it's on the short list of worst cards. Oh man, he did it again. What's the most begrudgingly playable?
Bearer of Memory, the 3/2 that can give +1/+1 counters to your enchantment creatures. Like, look, the begrudgingly playable cards are always these like 3-mana, like 3/2s or 2/3s with like minor abilities, and it's just like you put these cards in your deck, they're fine, but really they don't do anything so special that you're like, wow, I gotta play it.
It's always the same. Man, you really got that category on lockdown. Bearer of Memory is perfect. Is there a card you'll miss drafting? I know for me, it's Boseiju Reaches Skyward. Not only was it one of the more powerful uncommons, you know, really good, really fit the format well, but I love the play pattern of it. I love playing out a card like this that gets you some card advantage via lands, which you probably can either loot away or just play to cast your more expensive stuff, but then provides a legitimate creature after, by the way, 2 times I misclicked chapter 2 and put a land on top of my library. So that was annoying. But after essentially a brick on the middle one, which really is a tough bridge to go, like you have to give you a big payoff at the end. And they do. The fact that they gave the creature reach means that it's a stabilizer. When it hits, unless they can get rid of it, it's very difficult for your opponent to get through because it's going to be a 5/5, you know, something like that, 6/6 that turn, whatever. And it's got reach as well.
Yeah, I'm going to miss drafting Experimental Synthesizer. I enjoyed how that card played. It had a nice lottery feel to it because you play it and you're like, I hope I don't flip over my most expensive card. I hope I flip over a land or a 2-drop here. And then there's all these cool artifact synergies. And then even if you had nothing specific going on, you can always get, you know, your samurai and then another card out of it. So a really cool card all told. I really enjoyed how that one played out. Yeah,
I'm going to put a joint award for both of us here too. Containment Construct. We both really like that card, right? And it
definitely
played out in a really cool way. If you could follow it up with the network terminal or the modern age, like either of those meant you just weren't missing land drops going forward and you could combo off. So congrats, Containment Construct. That's for both of us. What was my soapboxiest card? Probably the Swamp, to be honest. But there was a small stretch of time where people were sending us decks that had the Invoke, like an Invoke, one of the, you know, quad colored cards.
Oh yeah, here's my red, blue, splash, black deck that has, you know, 7 islands and I have an Invoke.
Right. And I would always be like, no, you really can't play that. Like in that type of deck, that the Invoke might be harder to cast than the Kami War. Like, you know, getting up to quad is really, really tough. So that would be the honorable mention, but it's probably that Swamp. What card do you still have to read when it's cast against you?
Really, most of the sagas, especially the ones that aren't like the top common ones. Because even if you think you know what it does, you're like, does Zeus's many journeys let you, like, what does the creature do? Oh, it untaps when you block. Okay. You know, like there's just a lot going on with all these. Yeah.
And that's actually a good strategic note, right? Is that, I don't know, if when we get to covering Paper Magic again, you'll probably see it. But one of the things that there's kind of an arc. Is there a name for this arc? I don't know. Where you start off one way, but then you change, but then you end up going back to the old way that you were before. Like a good example would be I'm a new player at Magic. So when somebody plays a complicated card like a Saga, even if I'm pretty sure I know what it does, I might just read it, right? But then when I start getting good at Magic and I'm playing at the local level and I'm trying to beat the grinders and trying to win a PTQ, well, I'm too good for that now, right? Like I know all the cards. I don't need to read that card, right? But then you get to the Pro Tour and Paul Rietzel reaches over and picks up the card and wants to read it, and you're like, wait a second. And you realize that you kind of let go of your ego and just go, maybe you forgot something, right? Maybe you don't 100% know. Like there are times when you go, oh, that's right. There's more text on this card that nobody ever thinks about, but that I just happen to forget this one time, and so this is a good reminder on when to do that. For me, it was the Mythic Dragons. They don't come up often enough for me to memorize, the two options that they all have. I'll know kind of what it is, but it's like, how many cards do they get to look at? Or how many treasures is it again? Or like, do I really care if this thing dies? Like, am I going to die this turn if it does? And I would always have to read the dragons in just to be sure. Okay, here's a big one, Luis. This is kind of getting into the meat of it here. From a design and development aspect, how did the set fare? How did the mechanics play out? What were some of the wins and losses around that?
So the first thing is there was a lot of complexity, and that one's a really tricky one to evaluate, both for us and also for Wizards and their designers. It's actually a tough problem because it's like, well, a lot of the loudest players, people who listen to this podcast can attest, are the ones who like complexity and they want more complexity. They really enjoy that. Oh, there's so many build-arounds and so many archetypes, but the people who are driven away by it, you don't really hear from as much. So I like there being some sets that are this complex and have this as part of the range. I don't think it would be good if all sets did. And that's something that they have to kind of balance, right? It's not the easiest thing to figure out. I think the setting was really cool. Like, it had to be a little bit dicey. Like, okay, we're going to do, cyberpunk magic and 1,000 years in the future with all this like kind of nonsense, compared to like what normal, like the magic has been in the past, right? It's like,
they call
there's a lot going on here.
Yeah. The core fantasy theme that we're used to. This is totally different.
Yeah. So that part I think is definitely like, okay, how is this going to play out? Is this going to play out well? And I think it did. I think it actually played out really well. They made a lot of really deliberate decisions, right? You can see they don't have guns, right? That was not part of this. Like, there's no, they still are using katanas and like axes and stuff. But there is digital. There's memory chips and there's hacking and there's
Tamio's artifact is just an iPad,
right? And like that part I think is actually pretty cool. Like, I think that's a big part of what makes all this really fun. They really nailed that, and that just goes, as much as we might like to pretend we're the Ben S's of like, the cards shouldn't have pictures or names, they should just have numbers and they're gray featureless blobs. First of all, he wouldn't even have more fun. Second, none of us would. And having the setting be really good and come out well, I think is actually a huge part of like the enjoyment of the set. I think it actually matters quite a bit.
Because like you and I both really like the artwork. Right. Like I appreciate the artwork a lot, and that's cool. And this set was good on that too. The two questions I have is, one, where's the line? Right. Like, for example, the one card I think of when I think of this set in this context is the DJ.
The Togoroshi song shaper.
Like literally like spinning records in a club or whatever. And it's like, that's very grounded in our current culture. Right. And it's like, wow, that is very on the nose to make like a straight up DJ spinning records is like, that to me really stood out as like, this is a real Magic card. Like, it's so not a goblin, whatever, screaming over the horizon. It's just a totally different thing. So that's one thing, is how far do you push it? But here's a question I really have for you. You're saying they nailed it, they hit it. Is this going to be a sea change? Is this going to be the doors opening where we're going to get space sets and, stuff that isn't core fantasy?
My guess is no, not in that sense. I think there will be some amount of that, but my guess is they're pretty good. They're good at their job. They know what they're doing. Like when I think that they've been nailing the art and flavor so well, they're not gonna go back to this well right away. Like they are going to go back. This has demonstrated, once you demonstrate, hey, we can drastically change Magic's setting and still get good returns out of it, definitely that means, hey, we're going to do this again in the future. Does that mean then we're going to see a space set within 2 sets? Like, I don't think so. I just don't think that's the way it's going to go, you know?
Yeah.
I think that, yeah, I just think that moderation is important for this stuff as well.
Yeah, it looks like they've pushed the boundaries a bit here, and it worked really well. I think that this set was just a massive success, you know, just like
it was
thematically.
Really popular.
Yeah, really popular, really cool. Definitely a breath of fresh air as far as seeing mechs and stuff like that. There's some neat space there, and as long as they don't go too crazy, it seems like definitely worth revisiting.
Yeah, I think so, and I think that this has opened the door for a lot more of that, even if like I think part of that is not, hey, let's immediately go jump in and you know and get in there.
Okay. And what about the gameplay?
So the gameplay was really good. I think that the gameplay was successful. Like you look at kind of how the games played out, and they tended to be, I think, really fun. So
they did.
I think that people, you know, are gonna want more of this like pretty good, complex, but also just really entertaining gameplay. And that's the sort of thing that you're not always gonna find that in every single set. And when you increase the complexity this much, you run the risk of that not working out. But it worked out really well here.
Yeah, it really did. To me, the gameplay to me has been the emphasis over the past, say, year and a half or so, where we've had some unbalanced sets, but the gameplay saved it. And we've had some pretty crazy ideas, you know, pushing in different directions design-wise, and the gameplay saved it. And now they have a set that's pretty well balanced, and most of the stuff hit that they wanted to hit, and the gameplay was good. And that's a deadly combo. I mean, you know, to me, this is a standout set. This is one of those sets that really you go, wow, like they pushed a theme. It feels different than other sets, and they jammed a bunch of complexity and kind of grindiness in and managed to keep the balance intact without making it a print set. Like they really just kind of hit everything that you want to hit for this set.
Yeah. And I think that that's a huge part of why the set was a success. So I will say that much like every set, not every single mechanic got equal time, right? And was equally rewarded. That is just part of kind of how these things tend to work. Mm-hmm. You're not usually going to nail everything. Like it's just hard to do that. So the fact that this set didn't nail everything, I don't think is a big knock against it.
No, but you know, let's talk about the mechanics, and sometimes that ends up being the archetypes. I feel like they did nail the ones that mattered. So, for example, you know, 2 sets ago we have the werewolf set, and the werewolf set stinks. Yeah, if ninjutsu in this set sucked, that would have been really disappointing, and it didn't. They nailed it.
Yeah, I think ninjutsu was actually one of the best mechanics of the set. It ended up being a really fun deck. I love the way the ninjas decks play out. There's so much more tension and drama when it comes to attacking and blocking.
Yes.
It lets you play these 1/1 flyers everyone wants to play anyway. Like a lot of really cool stuff just going on. And I think that that was definitely a win. Like the sagas were really strong. This was cool that all the sagas did this. I expect next time we see sagas that won't be the case. But it was a cool kind of way to just have this play out, this cool new design space, and I think it worked out pretty well. Like I think people were pretty impressed with it, you know. And
I was, yeah, and they balanced them too. Again, we keep using that word, but dude, when you make sagas that turn into creatures, you are in a very touchy space. Those are powerful to start with, and if you push it even a little bit, the cards just get so much better than any single creature type card that you can do, and they managed to keep those in check too. They felt powerful but not broken.
Yeah, I agree. And overall, the sagas played out in a really cool way. Shrines, the shrines was a kind of like a sub theme. It was just okay.
And it's interesting because I think you could make the argument that they hit, right? Because they weren't supposed to be some over dominant, you know, strategy. They weren't supposed to be the thing that comes up all the time, right? So
no.
The mana fixing was there. They were all within spec for being like none of them were broken on their own. Yeah, you weren't really incentivized to go after them, but I mean, I think that the shrines did what the shrines were supposed to do in the set.
Yeah, and I think that people like shrines. They're a fun puzzle to solve. You know, it's a sort of thing that everyone's a pretty big fan of them, and it made sense that like including them, especially since Champions was known for its shrines, you know, is a good throwback.
Yeah.
Channel is another, you know, Kamigawa special, right? And it plays out fine. Like Channel ends up just being one of those like, yeah, this is a mechanic that you know, shows up on your cards and you're pretty happy about it, and it's all good. But it's just like it's not a really standout set mechanic. I wouldn't put it that way.
I agree. It to me, set mechanics, almost all of them fall into two broad categories. One of them is some version of kicker. Yeah. Like basically say some version of pay more at some point to get more. And the other ones are alternate costs, like not alternate costs, alternate cards, like making a card do one thing or another thing. And that's what Channel does. Cycling is in the same realm, right? Where it's like, oh, you can have it, you draw you a card or do this, you know, Morph can play out like that too. They add a lot of depth to a set. They give you a whole lot more playability, but they're not usually very resonant, right? Like it's not often that cycling is like exciting. It's just,
there's just not that much flavor to them. They're not like why is Channel so cool in this set versus others? It's like, well, there's no actual reason that it is, you know,
right.
It just happens that this is the set it's in.
Right. It's like, and we appreciate what it brings to the table, but it's just hard to, you know, give it a blue ribbon at the state fair for being the best mechanic, because it kind of just does what it does.
Yeah. So,
what about the artifacts and enchantments deck, like or idea, you know, with these types mattering?
The artifact enchantment stuff was pretty cool. Like I generally like types matter stuff. The one thing I didn't like about these were the gameplay of, is this an artifact? Is this an enchantment? The enchantments were a little easier to tell because those tended to have like the enchantment-y border.
Yeah.
But at this point, artifacts like Towarashi's Song Shaper, your favorite card, the DJ. Yeah. You can't tell that's an artifact by just looking at it.
Right. Like, there technically is like the metal barrier around the outside of the card, but that at a glance, especially if you don't play that often, you wouldn't see that. Yeah.
So you do have to do a little bit of digging, and I think that can be a drawback, especially, you know, going back to the like, you know, complexity or accessibility issue. Like when you pick up this set to play for the first time, how easy is it to tell what's going on? And the answer is it's not that easy, and this is one of the factors that could exacerbate that some. So
definitely. And as you mentioned, they went for complexity in this set, because the next thing we're going to talk about is reconfigure, which again, if you play Magic, it's not a big leap, right? To say like it's a creature, but it's also an equipment, right? So you can attach it to something. Okay, I get it. But boy, they really went all in on this set. I mean, just the stuff that we've talked about already are all very finicky things, right? Like ninjutsu's weird, right? Like you kind of have to understand how combat works, that type of stuff. You know, shrines are easy. Anybody can get those. Sagas are pretty easy. They kind of just do the thing, but Channel's a little weird. Reconfigure's definitely another, you know, something you have to consider or whatever if you're a new player.
Yeah, I think that reconfigure was just fine. It didn't play out that interestingly. I didn't think, at least. And I don't know if that's how the mechanic would play out if you did it again, or just they chose cards that you tended not to do a lot of reconfiguring with. Most of the time it feels like you kind of played your card and that nothing too special happened.
Yeah, they felt like they polarized them. Right. There's not a lot of reconfigure for 2 or 3, right? There's a couple cards like that, but there's like more that's like you can pay really cheap to kind of bounce it around, or it's like 5, right? It's like, okay, this will give you an outlet for later on in the game where if it comes to that point, you can say, I don't have anything else to do with my aggro deck. I flooded a little bit. I'm just going to start equipping my expensive creature and throwing that around and making big threats or whatever. I think that's a totally sensible design approach. But as you said, I had the same feeling where they were like, yeah, those cards were there, but like they didn't really resonate so much. It was just kind of, it felt a little mechanical, I guess is how I'd put it. A little black and white on a page rather than like something cool happening in the game.
Yeah. And again, not like, you know, kind of like before, not the most flavorful in the world, right? It's just this could have shown up in every set. Modified was one that like we were not surprised when it didn't really pop off, because trying to, equip things onto your creatures or put counters on them or auras on them has typically not been like the most dominant strategy.
Mm-hmm. You want your cards to stand on their own for the most part.
Yeah. So that definitely had some elements of that were like, oh, okay, yeah, this is not the most interesting. And the payoffs also tended to be not that good.
Right.
Like, if the payoffs were better, I think that would have been a lot more plausible in terms of like, all right, well, I'm going to actually go for this. But it turns out that the payoffs just weren't like super exciting. So
it's a very, very difficult mechanic to balance. Like, I think the best example of the push and the pull that you have to try to wrestle with to try to get it balanced is Walking Skyscraper, right? 8 mana, 8/8 trample, but it gets cheaper for each modified creature you control. And it's like, okay, well, that's pretty straightforward. Like, make a bunch of modified creatures and then I get this great payoff. But the problem with it is that if you have a bunch of modified creatures, you're already doing well, right? Like, you've got even just +1/+1 counters on your creatures usually puts you way ahead. So they had to like push Walking Skyscraper back quite a bit. But now you're in this weird zone where if you make it too easy to get the modified creatures and then you also give them Walking Skyscraper, then it's all on one end of the spectrum where you kind of overwhelm your opponent. But if you make it a little more difficult and they don't have as many modified creatures, now the Walking Skyscraper never sees the battlefield, right? So there's this kind of gap that you have to fill where you can't just keep making more and more modified creatures to pay off the modified payoffs, because then your board's just insanely good and there's like no downside. But people don't really want to take a risk like that when there's 2-for-1s and all these other type of abilities that are just so, easy to get that don't really ask much of you.
Yeah, and it's also just, it's tricky to get something right that, like you said, involves having this many creatures in play and doing things.
Yeah.
Mechanics that reward you for doing things you normally do in games of Magic tend to work out a little easier.
That's right.
Attack with a flyer is a lot easier of a bar for ninjas to do than put a +1/+1 counter or put an aura on your own creature.
Right.
So,
it also plays into the opposite. Yeah, it plays into the opposite way as well. Because what's the normal thing for your opponent to do when you start piling a bunch of stuff on your creature? Kill it, right? Like, they're just like, I was going to kill your creature anyway. Now you spend a card to get a +1/+1 counter for some future payoff. Well, I'm still just killing your creature, right? So, yeah. A little bit of a tough balance there.
And then, Samurai attacking alone. We again, I'm desiring that a aggro deck attacks alone isn't the most natural. It just turns out the designs didn't quite get them there. It's not that red-white is a bad color combination to draft. It's just this mechanic didn't really shine. It wasn't the top level. This is what you're doing. In the same way, blue-black and ninjas are inextricable, right? Like, blue-black is ninjas.
Yes.
So,
yep, they missed it on there. Maybe just needed to push it a little more. I thought this would actually be a better mechanic. I'm a huge fan of Exalted. It's one of my favorite mechanics, and this is kind of a take on it. But maybe they just didn't push the commons quite enough.
As for what this format taught us, how did it make us better at Limited, and what are the takeaways? I think it's cool that some of the best cards in the set challenge some of our notions as to what those would look like Imperial Oath and in the Kami War. Even like Okiba Reckoner Raid, like on first blush, it's like, is this going to be the best black common by a good margin, with Virus Beetle being the second? I wouldn't have guessed that.
No,
it did throw us for a loop, which it's good. It's good for us to know we got to keep ourselves on our toes, right? Like, we got to be agile and ready to adapt. And this definitely rewarded the people who on day 3 were like, I'm all in on these cards, and figuring out how good sagas were. Just anytime you get new challenges, it's good to be reminded, like, hey, things that used to be good aren't always going to be good, and things that used to look bad, like when they come in a slightly different form, might be good.
Yeah. For me, when I look back and think about kind of how the set played out and everything, it really resonates to me how much you can cover up with good gameplay. And if you don't have anything to cover up, how much that accentuates what you've got, which I think is the case here. Talked about it a minute ago, looking back at some of the sets that had some balancing errors, or, some of the archetypes just flopped, but the gameplay was good enough. This is a great example of peak, right? This for for drafters like you and I and a good chunk of our audience, this is a set that to me checks all the boxes. That there's nothing in this set where I'm going, yeah, they just really missed on this one part and it kind of held it back. It's like gameplay, balance. It's interesting. Yes, it is much more complex than an average set probably should be, but I like that. That's what I want out of these things. It also suits my speed, I guess you could say, right? Like I like a grindier, this isn't the slowest format we've played, but it's far from the fastest. And this is right in the sweet spot. But the gameplay, as much as it can save a mistake, it can also shine a spotlight on something that they did really well, like getting the balance or the archetypes and stuff in a good spot. And I think that that's what happened here. Any other teachings from the set?
I guess I'm just constantly amazed by the complexity budget they seem to have.
They're really pushing it.
But it seems to be working, so I'm not really complaining about it. Oh, one comparison I did want to make that I was reminded of earlier was Kaldheim had a similar thing going on where the multicolor decks were a huge percentage of the field. Mm-hmm. I think that Kamigawa did a lot better in terms of having there be more variety. Kaldheim, it felt like there was like the 5-color snow deck and not that much else when I remember back, and I think what were people playing? This set's not quite like that. You play against black-red, you play against blue-black, you play against straight green-white, whereas Kaldheim did not have that. So as much as I like the 5-color deck, I do enjoy it more when that's not the only thing going on.
Okay, so this one hit a little better balance. All right, big moment. What grade are we going to give this set?
I'd just give it an A. I don't really have any big complaints about the set. Even when we look at some of these mechanics or color pairs didn't get there quite as hard, it still did really well. There's no color pair where I would be shocked if you told me you drafted it, and there's a solid ton of color pairs that are just completely fine to draft. Yeah,
I got to tell you, the fixing really does, particularly in green, kind of smooth things over, because if you told me you drafted straight up red green, I'd be like, what? But you don't. You draft red green in another color, right? And so that kind of sucks in some of the red cards that may get left behind otherwise, for example. So where things ended up playing out, beautiful. To me, this is the gold standard, right? This is if you can make sets for limited that are like this repeatedly, which by the way, they have shown that they can either do this or get very close to it. I mean, you're in business. I would draft these type of sets for the rest of my life. The issue, I think that I would not call it a nitpick on this set. I believe that it's an A, is can you do that? Right? The complexity issue that you've brought up multiple times, this is too complex for the average set, right? I'm assuming, it's weird because I'm taking myself out of the equation. I want sets to look like this, but if you worked at Wizards and you were in charge of, that high level look at how complex these sets are, does this one push it too far in your mind? Do you think they'd need to ratchet this down a little?
I don't think you could do this every set.
Okay.
I think that you would run into issues if you did this every single time, but I think that you can do this a couple times a year. Having a set if this is I think going to be the most complex set, my guess is, of the year. But that might not be true. We're early in the year, but if this is the most complex set and then there's a gradient going down, I think this is fine. If you told me, hey, this is actually the least complex set of the year, I'd be like, what the hell is going on?
Okay,
I would be so confused.
Big red flag for you that maybe they're letting it get, because it is interesting to think about big set perspective. There was a number of years where we had core sets that would come out in the summer, and kind of the two roles of the core set was to get back to that core fantasy flavor, right? They kept those with angels and demons and dragons and stuff like that. And that kind of lets newer players come in and go, okay, this is what this is about at a base level.
Right.
But also they were simpler, right? And they were more accessible to newer players as well. I'm assuming they didn't sell as well, right? They're not as they'd have to just bump the power on some crazy cards to get those to sell, because people don't want 3 mana 3/3s, right? When, especially, when we get to Streets of New Capenna, we'll see what those look like now at common, and they are, much different beast. So it is kind of interesting to look back, because without core sets, in that slot anymore, it could become a bit of a runaway train, where new people just aren't going to be able to get into the format without some serious, we're going to need to have a school. Oh, you wanted to play a fun game of Magic? Well, enroll in our 2-week course, and you might be able to figure it out. And that, of course, isn't desirable. But overall, an A for this format, for the really great job. And I keep playing. I've played it all the way up until yesterday. So, that's the biggest compliment I can give is, well, it's money, right? It's just keep on buying more stuff. Favorite card in the format?
Always Beholding.
Always Beholding. Like, we both had it in there. Behold the Unspeakable. Not even remotely close. Like, this is the sweetest value card they've printed in a really long time. Easily the best thing about it is that you can pick it up again, right? It becomes a creature, and that being a creature on the battlefield, I almost never actually killed people with it. Like, I just played all my cards and won that way. So it was always like a 2/2 by the time I was going to attack with it. But the fact that I could ninjutsu it or just bounce it back to my hand and then replay it, oh, what a dream. That's all I really want to do with the rest of my life. So always Beholding. Good?
Oh, yeah.
All right, let's call it a show. We're going to be transitioning over to Streets of New Capenna once. I think we should be able to do it early next week. The review the card should be up because, again, of the pre-release, I'm going to go play. That usually, signals the time when all of it is released, and then I'll hit the ground running again early next week so we can get the set review out the door. If you want to find us on social media, I'm Marshall_LR and Luis is LSV. You can find everything related to the podcast at lrcast.com. Make sure you check out our sponsors, channelfireball.com for all your Magic needs, and ftx.com outside the US, ftx.us within for all of your digital asset needs. And that's going to do it for this one. We'll see you next week with the set review for New Capenna.
So one thing that I'm just super excited about is the anticipation of getting to play in paper Magic again. I've started once again to start trolling the Facebook groups and sale pages to get cards. I'm making sure I have cards to build a bunch of different decks, and it's surprising how much that OP announcement has kind of reinvigorated my desire to play in kind of these organized tournaments, which might even culminate in me going to a local tournament at some point here. We'll see if I can swing it. Oh my
God. If you showed up for a regional championship qualifier and I'm sitting down okay, my first one, and go to the pairings board, I'm like, what the hell? This is BS.
Look, here's the thing is just, I haven't seriously we've been in a world where we can't play paper Magic. I've done some cubes with friends, and that's been awesome. We did one draft where we cracked packs and stuff, and that was really cool. But the feeling of going to an event and all right, pairings are up, is just sends a chill through my spine.
Yeah. And
I gotta say, I'm so stoked for it. I'm just completely ready. So I don't know if anyone else is feeling like this. I assume I'm not the only one, but I'm definitely ready for that. And then the second thing I wanted to mention was there is a historic open this weekend, and I'm going to play Golgari Food. So if anyone's looking Golgari Food and Is It Phoenix are the two best decks. Not a big surprise. I think I'm going to start with Food and see how that goes. The new Painful Memories or whatever the card is from Alchemy, that's 1 and a black, draw 2 cards, and then all cards in your hand that cost 3 or more lose you a life. Well, the deck plays Luris. It has no cards that cost more mana, so it just
business.
Just straight up business. So that's my recommendation for the weekend. But really, more than anything else, just gotta get ready to play some live Magic, and I'll be trying to go to these regionals and everything, and maybe even play in the Pro Tour. It is one day my dream to get to compete in the Pro Tour. So.